men operating in earth against the kingdom of God, against the knowledge of God. So, all right, any questions about that? We're going to get to the two that are listed above the statue. When we look at Revelation 17, you'll see Egypt and Assyria, and we will discuss what that means. So flip over to Daniel 7 for a minute. We're not going to go through the whole thing again, but I do want to look at just a couple of things. You'll see on your chart for Daniel 7 that Babylon was represented by a lion with wings like eagles, that Medo-Persia was represented by a bear, that Greece was represented by a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads, and that Rome was the terrifying beast with the iron teeth. Those are important to understand when we look at Revelation 13, the description of the final beast empire, the thing that is going to come on the earth to control the flow of power and a false religious system that is rapidly spreading. So the lion, the bear, the leopard are going to be represented again. But there's one other thing that I wanted to look at. So when we look at Daniel 7, the 4th beast. So if you have a Bible, you can turn there. If not, I will read. So in verse 8, while I was contemplating the horns, so this is the 4th beast, and it has 10 horns. Let me go back to verse 7. And after this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong. It had large iron teeth, and it devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So the 10 horns match the 10 toes of the statue, representing the final empire that is to come. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. You'll see that expression about the uttering of great boasts again and again when describing the little horn. So who is the little horn? So that is the traditional teaching, Antiochus Epiphanes, but my conviction actually is, and if we look, that it's not Antiochus. Antiochus was a type and shadow of the fulfilling of the little horn, but that it actually is referring to the Antichrist. So we're going to see this in Daniel 7 and in Daniel 8 and in Revelation 13. The same expression to describe the same person. All right. So when you skip down, so he keeps looking, thrones are set up and so forth, describing God sitting on his throne in verse 11 of 7. And then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. So, again, this is the destruction of the Antichrist. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. And we have the interpretation in verses 15 on down to the end of the chapter. But I want you to see, when we're looking at who is the Antichrist and what is he going to be doing, there are passages throughout Daniel that talk about his activities, his power, what he's been given. When you look at 2 Thessalonians 2, you look at different passages in Daniel, and you look at Revelation 13, you can kind of create a composite picture of who the Antichrist is. So, in verse 25, well, let's skip back to verse 24. And as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will rise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and he will subdue 3 kings. And he will speak out against the Most High, and wear down the saints of the Highest One. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand. And if you're one who has scripture that you mark, please mark this, because this is a time reference that we'll see in the New Testament as well. They will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So how long is that? 3.5 years. And I just popped out my mic. Are we still good? Yeah, okay. So, in Daniel 8, go to verse 9. So, in Daniel 8, it describes 2 different animals representing 2 kingdoms, a ram that represented Medo-Persia, and a goat that represented Alexander the Great, the Greece kingdom. And he had one dominant horn. That horn is broken, and it separated into 4 kingdoms. Those were his 4 generals. And in verse 9 of Daniel 8, out of one of them, so this is one of the 4 kingdoms that arose after the fall of Alexander, and out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, same description as 7, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, toward the beautiful land. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. Now, who would that be describing? I mean, literally, that's Satan. So, again, the Antichrist is going to be operating with the power and the authority of Satan, as we'll see in Revelation 13. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host. And here we have a reference again to the abomination of desolation. And it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. And on account of the transgression, the host will be given over to the horn with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. So again, here's another description of the activities of the Antichrist, his power and authority, and again described as a little horn. Now, if you flip over to verse 23 down to verse 26, this is a description of the activities of the little horn. So we don't need to describe them all, but I want you to notice in verse 23, and in the latter period of their rule, talking about the 4 kingdoms, when the transgressors have run their course, so this is way down the line, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue, and his power will be mighty, but not by his own power. So again, this is the supernatural power that is given to the Antichrist through Satan. And again, in verse 25, you see that he will magnify himself in his heart. Through shrewdness, he will cause deceit to succeed. He will even oppose the Prince of Princes, but he will be broken without human agency. So here is another passage that is describing the activities of the Antichrist and his eventual fall. All right. So I want to read one more thing in Daniel before we move on. So in Daniel 11, there's a lot of debate about the kings and kingdoms that are described through Daniel 11. But starting at verse 21 of Daniel 11, all the way down to the end of the chapter in verse 45, to my mind, that is a description of the activities of the Antichrist. And I'm not going to sit and read the whole thing, but I do encourage you to read them. Yes, actually, I suggest not reading the commentary and just starting at verse 21. And because it's describing the activities of one king. So in verse 21, and in his place a despicable person will arise on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred. He will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue, and the overflowing of forces will be flooded away before him and shattered, and also the prince of the covenant. And again, here we have a reference, after an alliance is made with him. So is that the firm covenant that we have that begins the timeline? After an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception, will go up and gain power with a small force of people. In a time of tranquility, he will enter the richest parts of the realm and accomplish what his fathers never did. And this goes on, all the way through to verse 45. So, this is describing the end time. And when you look in Daniel 12, this is the last section of this that I want to look at in Daniel. It says, now at that time. So what time is being referred to? The time of the operation of the Antichrist. So that's this time period. Okay? The final 7 years, and most specifically, right about the midpoint. Now at that time, Michael, the great prince, who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise. That phrase, will arise, is often used to describe will arise in battle. So he is 12:1. And catch the next description. There will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. Does that sound familiar? Well, it's also in Matthew, but it is in Revelation. It's in Matthew 24, talking about, I'm just going to read it to you. You can keep your finger there in Daniel. But in Matthew 24:15, right after the abomination of desolation, he talks about this being the time of the great tribulation. I'll get there. So, verse 24:15, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on his housetop not go down to get the things out that are in his house. But let him who is in the field not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are with child, who nurse babes in those days. But pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be a great tribulation, such has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever shall. So it is the same language in Daniel 12:1 and 2, well, 12:1, that describes the beginning of the Great Tribulation in Matthew 24:15. I'm in the wrong place here. Okay. 15 through 22. So, something for you to think about. It is talking about Michael arising in battle. Is there a description of Michael arising in battle in the book of Revelation? When the dragon is thrown to the earth, the battle between Michael and his angels and Satan and his angels. So the question then becomes, is what is referenced in Daniel 12:1, which is around this time, talking about the beginning of the abomination of desolation, Michael arising, is that a description of Revelation 12 and the war in heaven between Michael and Satan? We're going to look at that much later. A question for you to ponder. Okay, there'll be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time, and at that time your people, everyone who's found written in the book of life, will be rescued. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, those or these to everlasting life, but others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. Now, that is a problematic verse in a number of ways, and I'm not sure that we're going to get into the problems of it at the moment, but let me finish the reading of this part. And those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven, and those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So there's two places here where it talks about those who have insight are going to respond differently during this time period than those who do not. So this is one of the reasons, to my mind, that it is really important that we understand the events, is because if I understand, I can have a different response. I don't have to be like those who are getting freaked out and like, what in the world is going on? I know what's going on. I know what God's intent is. I know what's happening, and I know how to prepare, and I know how to respond. So that's one of the reasons I think that it's important that we understand this. So, skipping down to verse 6. So we see a man dressed in linen above the waters. And one said to the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long will it be to the end of these wonders? So everything that was being described, how long to the end? And I heard the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river, as he raised his right hand and his left toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. So here again, we see the same time reference that was used to describe what? What? Yes, 3.5 years, but it was referencing who or whom? The little horn or the Antichrist. So he's saying that the end of all of the events that are being described is at the end of the 3.5-year period when the Antichrist is operating. And it makes a very interesting statement. It says, when he's finished shattering the power of the holy people. So that means that there are holy people in operation right up until the end. And so the question then becomes, who is that referring to? Okay? So we're going to be looking for a holy people that are operating in power and authority during the same time period as the Antichrist. Okay? Questions? Yeah. So in verse 5 it says, then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, 2 others were standing, one on this bank of the river and the other on the other bank of the river. And one said to the man dressed in linen who was above the waters, my mind says that they're angels. We're not given an actual identifier as to who they are, but to make the pronouncement that they made and to answer Daniel's question, they have to be from heaven and they have to know those things. Yeah, there's two men, one on the bank, one on the other bank. Well, the man in linen, I believe. And the one said to the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river. So you can read this 2 ways, because if they're on the banks, they're above the water of the river. So it doesn't mean they're necessarily in the air, it just means they're above the water. So it could be referring to one or the other of the 2 men, or it could be a third. But I think it's one of the 2. But so notice we're given a time reference. I'm going to give you a chart that has every single time reference given about end time events. And we're going to look at how they all line up. We're not there yet, but the one that we've seen twice now is time, times, and half a time. And that refers to both when the Antichrist is operating in power and authority and when the end of all of these events are complete. So that at the end of the Antichrist power and authority is the end of all of these events. Does that make sense? Okay. One other time reference to look at. In verse 10 of Daniel 12, many will be purged, purified, and refined. But the wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand. But those who have insight will understand. Thank you, Lord, it will be us. And from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished, what is that referring to? So, when the Antichrist enters the holy place and performs the abomination of desolation and ends the regular sacrifice. So again, he's giving a time reference here. And from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. How blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1,335 days. Now, there are other time references where it says it's 1,260 days. So this time reference gives us an extra 30 days, and we need to be able to place that in our timeline, and then an extra 45 days beyond that. Now, I believe that that exactly matches what we're going to look at. But just so that you kind of have a picture, 1,260 days, they're literally two 1,260-day time periods in the 7 years. Each one is 3.5 years long. My conviction, again, is that the 1,260 days ends here. So the extra 30 and the extra 45 would be beyond that, but we're going to see as we go through it. Okay? Any questions? Okay. Turn to Revelation 13. I know we're jumping way ahead, but this is about the beast and the empire that the beast... I want to reference something. In Scripture, when it's talking about the beast, sometimes it's referring to the Antichrist, and sometimes it's referring to the kingdom that the Antichrist runs. So you have to pay attention to the context when it says the beast, okay? Because both of the references are valid when we look at it. So right at the very first verse, Revelation 13. And he stood on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. Now, what are the 7 heads? So we saw the 10 toes on the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. We saw the 10 horns on the first description of the beast in Daniel 7, but we have not been introduced to the 7 heads until now. So, we're going to come back to it. So I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, or crowns, and on his heads were blasphemous names. This is actually something that you can use to understand where you are in the timeline. What does a crown represent? Power and authority as a king. So what it's saying is the 10 kings that make up the final beast empire now have power and authority. They're wearing their crowns. Okay? So we have an idea of where we are. And that beast which I saw was like a leopard. So what does a leopard represent? Right, so when we go back to our chart on Daniel 7, you'll see that Greece, of the 4 in Daniel 7, was represented by the leopard. So the body of the beast is that of the kingdom of Alexander the Great. His feet were like those of a bear. What was the bear? Medo-Persia. So it's got the feet of the bear, Medo-Persia, the body of Greece, the leopard, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And what was the lion? Babylon. So these are really important. They aren't just indiscriminate descriptions. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. So I want you to ask yourself a question. So who's the dragon? Satan. So he's always represented as the dragon. So why did Satan give his power, throne, and great authority to the Antichrist and the Antichrist kingdom? What happened that would cause Satan to say, I'm going to give all of my power and authority to the Antichrist and his kingdom? Satan didn't do that, but the Antichrist did that, right. But so why, this description, so let me place this for a moment, this description of Satan giving him his power, throne, and great authority happens just before the abomination of desolation. Okay? So that's like right here. And that's the same time when we see the battle, perhaps, of Michael and his angels and Satan and his angels. Well, the process by which the Antichrist becomes the Antichrist is a different thing, and we'd have to go back to Daniel to answer that, but he has basically sold himself over. So, but something had to happen right at this point that causes Satan to give his power, throne, and great authority to the Antichrist, so that the Antichrist can then in turn perform what he is meant to do during his 3.5 years of action. Let's look at this for just a minute. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. And I want you to catch this. This is really important. Verse 4, and they worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with him. Now, I want you to ask yourself a question. This isn't the only place, but one of the teachings has been that the beast empire was the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Church, rather. So, can you see why that might not be the case when we just read that verse? Well, not only that, it says that the beast causes people to worship the dragon. For all their corruption in all of the time of the Roman Catholic Church, they never promoted the worship of Satan. Now, some may argue that elements of that are corrupt and are part of satanic permission, but this is a wholly different description. This is saying that this empire is saying to worship Satan directly. So when you're thinking about, well, then who does that fit? That narrows the list down greatly. Okay? Remember, every other kingdom on this list had a false religious system at the center of its power structure. So the one that is coming also has a false religious system at the center of its power structure that controls the flow of how things work in this final empire. Now, so we're going to look at this in more detail. It's not here that they worship Satan, the dragon. It's on down. So at first they're worshiping the beast, but it goes from worshiping the beast to directly worshiping Satan. Okay? So there is a false religious system that is a vehicle to get people to worship Satan. Okay? Did you have something, Bo? Yes, it is Islam. And I could spend 2 weeks just talking about Islam in terms of how the belief system, how they operate, the fact that their prophetic 12th Imam, so they have, just like we have the book of Revelation, they have prophetic writings, and they're describing the coming of the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, who is supposed to Islamicize the world. And he's supposed to come during a time of chaos. So one of the things that a number of Muslim sects feel is correct is to create that chaos in the world so that they can promote the coming of the Mahdi. Now, if you want to look at where Islam is now concentrating its power and its authority, it's basically the same countries that are involved in the description of the Antichrist kingdom. Okay? So Islam fits this to a T. And if you look at, and if we get time, we'll do that, but if you look at a lot of the things that are within Islam in terms of the belief system, it's very easy to go from worshiping Allah, which is not God, to basically saying, I'm worshiping Satan. So, okay, continuing on. And there was given, verse 5, and there was given to him, here we go again, a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. Same description from Daniel 7 and Daniel 8 of the little horn. And authority to act for 42 months. So here we have another time reference. 42 months. What is that? 3.5 years. So again, we have another 3.5-year reference, but it's using a different description. So there's actually a system to that of why they use the different descriptors to describe the same 3.5 years. And so we're going to get to that when we look at all of them side by side. But again, 3.5 years. Who gives him the authority to act for 42 months? See, this is the interesting part. The first time I read that, I just kind of glossed over it, and I was like, okay, well, I saw that in Daniel. He's got 3.5 years to act. But who is it that's granting him that authority to act for 42 months? It has to be God. God is the only one that can give that authority. So I want you to get the picture in your head, if you can, because the first time you think about it, your brain goes tilt. But it is God Almighty who is giving the Antichrist a window of time in which to act. Now, Satan is the one who gave him the power and authority and throne, but it's God who gives him permission to act for 42 months. So, is there something that God is using the Antichrist kingdom and that power and authority in the earth to accomplish his ends as well? And the answer would have to be yes, otherwise he wouldn't give him permission. So, say again? Well, actually, we do know why, but we haven't gotten to the answer yet. So, that's again, unfortunately, down the road. But I want you to see the picture is he has 3.5 years, and then his time is up. Remember what it said? It said, when is the end of all of these wonders? Time, times, and half a time. And as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events are complete. When you looked at the description in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, what it says is that he's operating until the coming of the Ancient of Days, and his power and authority are broken, and the saints take possession of the kingdom. Remember I said before, all of these events, it's about a clash of kingdoms. So, this is God taking back the kingdoms of the earth unto himself. So I want you to understand that description in Daniel 7 is going to come up again in the book of Revelation. So again, we have a marker to look at and to look for. All right. And he opened his mouth, verse 6, in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And by the way, where do we dwell? Where do we dwell? Yes, our citizenship is in heaven, from which we eagerly wait for a Savior. Right, but so whenever you see a description in the book of Revelation, this is critically important. Whenever you see the phrase, those who dwell on the earth or those who dwell upon the earth, that is referring to the unsaved. That is not where we dwell. Okay? So, verse 7, and it was given to him to make war with the saints. Now, I won't have enough time for that one. We'll go back to that. And to overcome them, an authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. And all who dwell on the earth, that's the unsaved. And that verb tense there is present participle. That means a continuous repetitive action where I am choosing to reject God. Will worship him. Everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. Now I'm going to stop there, and I want to go to Revelation 17 unless anybody has questions on Revelation 13. I want to fill in our chart. So I'm not going to try and explain exactly where we are in the timeline of events in Revelation 17, but there is a description of the beast empire in Revelation 17 that helps us understand what we've been looking at. All right. But I guess we're going to have to deal with the harlot. Okay, 17:1. And one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, I shall show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on the many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth, again the unsaved, were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. And he carried me away in the spirit, and just because we haven't read the whole description, the harlot rides the beast. Okay? She is literally on top of the beast riding it. The harlot represents the false religious systems of the world raised up against the knowledge of God. Okay? So remember I said each of these kingdoms had a false religious system at the center, at the heart of it. What's the last false religious system? My conviction, Islam, that is going to be used to control the final empire. But the woman that rides the beast, the harlot, she is the picture of that whole false religious system from beginning to end. And you'll see this description. Okay, and he carried me away, verse 3, in the spirit, into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of the abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality. Exactly. So I'm going to mention what she's talking about to the tape in just a second. She's talking about whether the Catholic Church could fit this. And upon her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. So I want you to think about this. When did the harlotry begin? Well, you could say Adam and Eve, that was the fall, but the harlotry is a literal deliberate false religious system that man raises up and worships in opposition to God. So in Babel, not Babylon, but in Babel, Nimrod. So it said that Nimrod was a mighty hunter before God. That word means standing in opposition to. Nimrod and his wife created a false religious system that when Babel fell was then exported to the kingdoms of the world. So if the harlot has existed since the beginning as a false religious system, could the Catholic Church possibly be that false religious system? No, it didn't exist. So, I want you to understand, has the Catholic Church done things that are abusive and wrong? Yes, absolutely. But that doesn't mean there aren't Catholics that are saved, and it also doesn't mean that the Catholic Church is the false religious system. It is not. It does not match the description in Revelation 17. But let's go on. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus, and when I saw her, I wondered greatly. Notice she feeds on the blood of the martyrs. And the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I shall tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that you saw was, this is always fun to read, was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and to go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth will wonder, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast, that he was and is not and will come. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. Now, the word kings there also means kingdoms, same word, and my conviction is that this actually means kingdoms, not kings. They are 7 kingdoms. So here we get the description. He is speaking to John. What kingdom is John existing in at the time? Rome. So he says 5, there are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, verse 10. 1 is, and the other has not yet come. So at the time of John, there is a kingdom yet to come, before the final kingdom. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. And the beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is of the 7, and he goes to destruction. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings which have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. Now, I want you to catch this real clearly so we can actually paint the picture of the kingdoms that are involved in the final kingdom. So he said 5 have fallen. So if you look at your chart here, we know that Babylon has already fallen, Medo-Persia has fallen, and Greece has fallen. That's 3. Rome was the kingdom that is at the time that John is writing this. So 5 have fallen, 1 is. So we have 3 of the 5 fallen, and Rome is the one that is. This is where the Egypt and Assyria come in. The kingdoms before Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So these are the 2 kingdoms that ruled over the earth, that were the dominant kingdoms at the time, and also enslaved or oppressed Israel and the truth. They had a false religious system at the center of those kingdoms. And I've spent hundreds of hours looking at the religious systems of each of these kingdoms, and I could bore you to death with all that information, but I'm not going to. So just understand, each of them had that. So I want you to think about this. So these are the 5 that have fallen: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. Rome is the one that is. So, and then he says there is one yet to come, and it must remain a little while. So this kingdom has to have a false religious system at the heart of it that drives the power structure, the flow of money, and its activities. And it also has to be a kingdom that is dominant in the earth for a period of time, whose purpose and goal was the suppression of the truth, to attack Jews, and to corrupt the church. Can anybody think of a kingdom that fits that description? Yes, Hitler. Nazi Germany, if you do an interesting study on on the belief system of Nazi Germany and what it was that drove them. It was a false religious system at the heart of their decision-making. Why they attacked the Jews, why they chose to kill 6 million Jews. So if all of that is true, if Nazi Germany was the seventh kingdom, and it's come and gone, we know that we have already gone through the 7 heads, and we're waiting for the 10 horns, the last kingdom. Why did Nazi Germany have to come and must remain a little while? Why would God even allow that? Give that man a cigar so that Israel could become a nation. Out of what happened in World War II, there's an interesting history about the politics behind the formation of the State of Israel, but without what happened, Israel would not have come to be. So, as horrendous as what Nazi Germany did, Israel came to be. And if you look at all of the prophecy with regards to end time, it all revolves around Israel being reformed and Jerusalem being the capital and a rebuilt temple. So when you go back and read commentaries prior to 1948, none of them believed, except one, none of them believed that the state of Israel would ever be made again. They all believed it was a spiritual description, not a physical reality. Wycliffe was the only commentary I could find that actually believed that there would be a recreated Israel, that Jerusalem would become the capital, and that there would be a rebuilt temple. So, kudos. So now we're faced with our 7 kingdoms. You can fill in your chart here for Revelation 13 and 17. Let's do that real fast, if we can. So, under Revelation 13, with Babylon, you put mouth like a lion. What would the Medo-Persia be? The feet of the bear. Greece would be the body of the leopard. Now, under this column where it says Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, right here, I would put Germany. That's the 7th kingdom. Just above the 10 horns and the little horn. And for Revelation 13 at the bottom, you can also put the 10 horns and the 7 heads. So now you have in your hands a picture of the nations, the kingdoms that are part of the final beast empire. Now, I tried to generate a list for you of all of the countries that presently exist that fall under that domain, but there's a problem with that. So, the largest 2 extents were Alexander the Great and the Roman Empire. And if I look at all those countries that are involved, that includes parts of Great Britain fell to the Roman Empire, all the way into India with Alexander the Great, all of the Middle East, all of the Near East. But what about the kingdoms that aren't represented? So, the United States, Canada, North and South America, are we exempt? So there are actually some people that teach that we're exempt, but the reality is when you look at how it's described, the nations are ethnoses. Ethnos, it is an ethnic group. And so the ethnic groups of those nations are who inhabit these nations. And so they would be included in the spread of the final beast empire. Okay? So this is actually not going to involve every single country in the world, but a huge portion of it. Well, except maybe Antarctica. I don't think anybody's going to be there, but don't know. Actually, I mean, honestly, right now the major powers are fighting over Antarctica, so anything is possible. But, so you're looking at the reach of the Antichrist empire being global, affecting the power structure of every country involved, and that they are going to be forced to either bow to that will and that belief system and that economic system, or be crushed. So when we look at the idea of he'll cause them to receive a mark, you can't buy nor sell, to my mind, COVID was the test run of that idea, where they could threaten you if you left your house. I have friends in countries around the world, and we had it, as crazy as it was here, we had it easy compared to a lot of countries where, I mean, they would arrest you if you left your house. They took children from parents, just really, and I mean, even in Australia, we have some friends in Australia, and I was amazed at the level of tyranny, honestly. But that is a picture of how this kingdom is going to work. It's tyranny. It is, you do what I tell you, you worship what I tell you, or I stop your ability to buy and sell, I stop your ability to function. Now, does that mean that we're doomed? No, it does not. Yes, John. The Real ID? Okay. See, I don't know whether Real ID is part of that or not. I haven't really examined it. I'm not real keen on Real ID, but I don't think so. So I think the technology exists right now for being able to control buying and selling through something implanted on the hand. And boy, I could go on for a long time. But so there was a guy that came out when they started doing the chip, the little like size of a piece of rice on the hand. The reason it was on the hand is because of the temperature changes are what charge the battery. So the same thing on the forehead. The temperature change can recycle the battery. But there was 2 different guys that came forward and used to go from church to church talking about they were one of the people that designed this thing, and they didn't know what they were building. They were Christians, and it was like it finally dawned on them what they were a part of. But as far as that goes, and they're going to keep refining it, but as far as it goes, the technology already exists now. Yeah. They're not forcing people yet, but a lot of people, because of the convenience, and this is the other thing about our society, we worship convenience. And it's like, well, it's so much easier if I can just put my hand up and walk through or get my account charged. I don't have to take out a card. I don't have to take out money. And that's what allows the control. So it's something you have to measure, something you have to think about. Yeah, Sean. Yes. Yeah, and so there's this really, there's an article written by a Christian person who's been in business for a long time, and they were saying to those of you in the church, keep using cash, because if you drive cash out of the system, there comes a point of no return in terms of their ability to just shut cash down, and then you can't buy or sell without being part of that system, unless you're going to barter. Go ahead. Right. Yes. Right, and so, create the system. Yes. Yeah. So for me, it was something that occurred to me about 25, 30 years ago when I started studying this stuff in depth, and I was just like, okay, well, back then it wasn't, the technology didn't really exist in the way it does now. You know, you just were watching incrementally how this has come about. So, but the guy that I was listening to, he said, if you go along with not using cash, cash keeps going out of the system until it's going to be real easy to shut it down. So any questions? Yeah.
It's not just more or less a statement, and I didn't think of this for a long time, but I heard a lot of people when Helene come through here, and a lot of people were in a disbelief of all the damage and all this stuff that could be done, and why did God allow this? There's always the why question.
Yes.
Well, the point that I eventually got to, and you and I have not discussed this, but eventually I saw something in there that many people may not think of, but now that you brought it out right here, it kind of strengthens my idea. It may have been God saying, hey, look at this. We knocked out all this. How many days was it you couldn't use a card in Andrew?
Right. You had to have cash. Yep.
You were sunk.
Yeah.
And I'm old school. I'm sorry. I keep cash. But, it's this stuff here. Maybe that was God saying, hey.
Well, it certainly allows us to present the argument that if the electronics go down, what are you going to do? I mean.
I know it just barely parallels what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But still, the point is.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So what I would like, we're not going to be meeting next Wednesday. Next Wednesday is the last Wednesday of the month. So when we come back, I'm going to start into the book of Revelation. We're actually going to finally get there. But I wanted to lay a foundation of understanding the basic timeline, the events, and what we're looking at and who the players are, so that when we read this, we have context. To me, one of the most important things that we're going to look at is actually the 7 letters to the 7 churches, but we're not going to do that to start with. I'm going to wait a couple weeks before we get there because there are references in the 7 letters to the 7 churches that you will not understand until we've looked at other things. Okay? But to me, they're just about the most important thing that we can read. All right. So, Sean, would you be willing to close us? Amen.